The sky above the desert was quiet, full of stars that blinked like sleepy eyes. Then something roared through the silence, a falling object, on fire, spinning fast. It crashed hard into the sand, smoke rising like a signal to the whole planet. From the wreckage, a small figure crawled out, covered in dust. Coughing, trembling, she stood up, brushing dirt off her clothes. Her long ears twitching nervously, her skin was pale blue, and she had markings like glowing tattoos across her arms. She looked around, then took a deep breath and shouted, "I'm practically an adult human." Jake had seen many strange things in his life, but this moment was new even for him. He had just finished fixing a power relay when he saw the explosion in the distance. Now standing in front of him was a teenage alien girl, trying to act brave. She was clearly hurt, but she stood tall, her chin high like she had something to prove. Hi," Jake said, confused. "You all right?" "I don't need help," she answered quickly, then winced and held her side. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sure doesn't look like it." The girl tried to walk, but stumbled and almost fell. Jake caught her gently, and she slapped his hand. "Away," I said. "I'm fine," she muttered, cheeks turning purple from embarrassment. Jake looked at her closely. She couldn't have been more than 15 or 16 in human years. Still, there was something in her eyes, something old and tired, like she had seen too much for someone so young. "All right, practically an adult," Jake said with a smirk. "You got a name?" She paused, then said softly, "Lura." Jake led her back to his outpost, a small shelter made from scrap metal and solar panels. It wasn't much, but it had warmth, food, and safety, 3 things she clearly needed. Lura sat down with a sigh, then looked around with cautious eyes. Jake offered her water, and she hesitated before drinking it slowly. Her hands shook, just a little. "Where are you from?" Jake asked. Lura stared at the wall for a long moment, then whispered, "Far away." He didn't push, not yet. He knew that look runaways always carried it, the weight of escape, the fear of being found, the silence of hiding something big, later. That night, Jake fixed a plate of rehydrated stew and handed it to her. Lura sniffed it, then tasted a bite, her eyes widening in surprise. "You actually cook?" she asked. "Barely," Jake laughed. "But it's not poison." Lura gave a small smile, her first one, then quickly looked away. As they sat near the heater, Lura kept glancing at the sky through the window. Every little sound outside made her tense up, Jake noticed. "You expecting someone?" She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "They'll come for me soon." "Who?" Jake asked, but she just shook her head. Her shoulders were tight, her hands clutched her knees. She was afraid, but trying hard not to show it. Jake leaned back and turned on the old music player, letting soft tunes fill the silence. "I'm not gonna force you to talk," he said calmly, "but you're safe here for now." Lura stared at him, unsure. Then she said quietly, "You're different from the others." Jake chuckled. "I get that a lot." As the night grew colder, Lura finally lay down on the extra cot in the corner. She didn't say good night, but Jake heard her whisper something in her alien language, a word that sounded like both a prayer and a warning. Jake didn't sleep much that night. He kept the lights low and checked the scanners for any approaching ships. Whatever Lura was running from, it might come here next, but he had made a quiet decision in his mind. If someone came for her, they'd have to go through him first. The wind blew softly across the desert outpost, carrying with it grains of red sand that danced in the air like tiny sparks. Jake stood outside, fixing a loose wire, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the strange alien girl asleep inside. Lura hadn't said much since last night, but something about her silence spoke louder than words. She acted strong, but he had seen the fear behind her eyes, the way her hand always hovered near the small device on her belt. She stepped outside without a word. Blinking against the morning sun, Jake watched her carefully, noticing how her movements were light and sharp, like someone trained, not just a scared teen. She walked over to the broken drone lying in the sand, picked up a tool from Jake's Kit without asking and started fixing it. Her hands moved fast. Too fast for someone who claimed to be just running away. Jake raised an eyebrow. You know tech? Laura didn't look up. I learned a few things. The drone hummed to life in seconds, floating up like it had never been damaged. Jake just stared. That's not a few things. Kid. I'm not a kid, she replied quietly. Not. Looking at him, inside the outpost, Jake turned on the scanner to check for signals. Laura stood behind him, pretending not to care, but when the screen blinked red for a moment, her eyes locked onto it with laser focus. Jake noticed but said nothing. Later, when she thought he wasn't looking, she went over to the scanner again. Tapping buttons with confidence, the scanner showed something strange, a small tracking signal. Buried in layers of code. Jake froze. Laura, what is that? She looked like she might run, but instead she sighed and sat down slowly. They put a tracker in me, she said quietly. Under the skin. Jake's stomach dropped. Who are they? She didn't answer right away, her voice barely. Above a whisper. People who want to use me. Jake leaned against the wall, trying to stay calm. You escaped from somewhere important, didn't you? Laura nodded, eyes full of worry. Jake walked over to his tools, picking up a small scanner and a surgical chip remover. Let me help, he said. She hesitated, her body tense, but finally nodded. The small device under her skin beeped when the scanner passed over it, just below her shoulder. Jake numbed the area and removed it carefully, placing the tiny tracker into a jar and locking it. Laura looked at the glass jar, breathing out slowly, like a weight had been lifted from her chest. But even with the tracker gone, she didn't smile. They won't stop, she whispered. They'll keep looking. Jake looked her in the eye. Then we stay ahead of them. That night, Laura sat by the window again, watching the stars. Jake handed her a small bag of dried fruit, something rare and sweet. She took it, surprised, and quietly said, Thank you. Jake smiled. Don't mention it. She looked at him for a long moment, then asked, Why are you being kind? To me? Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Because someone helped me once. When I was alone too. Laura didn't say anything else, but her grip on the fruit tightened just a little as they prepared for bed. Jake checked the jar holding the tracker again. It blinked weakly, still sending out a signal. He stepped outside, walked far into the desert, and buried it deep in the sand. If anyone came looking, they'd be chasing the wrong trail. The stars above seemed peaceful, but Jake knew better. Something was coming, and that strange alien girl who fixed drones and spoke softly was at the center of it. He didn't know what she really was, or what she was hiding, but one thing was clear, this was no ordinary teenager, and if danger followed her here, he'd stand by her, even if it meant standing against something bigger than both of them. The silence of the night didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the quiet before something bad. Jake lay awake on his cot, listening, his hand resting near the old blaster he kept by the bed. Laura was asleep on the far side of the room, her breathing slow but tense, like she was still running in her dreams. A soft sound outside made Jake sit up straight, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the window. He crept toward the door and opened it just a crack. A flash of movement darted across the sand, too fast for any animal. Then the roof shook violently, followed by the hiss of metal and the sound of something landing hard. Jake grabbed his blaster. But it was already too late. The ceiling burst open, and a figure dropped through in a blur of silver and black. It was tall, armored, and moved like a machine, but its red glowing eyes were all too alive. Before Jake could fire, the intruder kicked the weapon from his hand, sending it across the floor. Laura woke with a start, her eyes wide, her body freezing for half a second. Then she did something Jake didn't expect. She ran toward the enemy. Not away from it, she jumped onto its back, clawing at the smooth armor, yelling in a strange alien language. The bounty hunter grabbed her by the neck and slammed her into the wall. Hard, Jake dove for his blaster and fired 3 quick shots. Sparks flying as they hit the intruder's side. It staggered, just a little, before turning to face him with a low, rumbling growl. Lura rolled to her feet, blood on her lip, but fire in her eyes. "Don't let it call for backup," she shouted. Jake saw it reaching for its comlink and fired again, this time hitting its wrist and blasting the device apart. Lura grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and swung it with all her strength. The hit echoed like thunder, and the hunter stumbled, giving Jake the chance to knock it off balance. Together, they forced it outside, where Jake triggered one of his P's. Defense traps. The ground beneath the intruder lit up blue, and a net of electric energy wrapped around it. It screamed in a metallic voice, twitching, and then collapsed in a smoking heap. For a moment, there was only the sound of breathing and the distant wind. Jake dropped to the sand, chest heaving. Lura stood beside him, trembling, her pipe falling from her hand. Jake looked at her, surprised. "You fought like a soldier." "I was trained to be one," she said softly, "since I could walk." Jake studied the burned-out armor of the bounty hunter. On its chest was a symbol, one he had only seen once, long ago during his time with the Peace Corps. It belonged to an elite group, one that didn't stop until their target was captured or destroyed. "You were right," Jake muttered. "They won't stop." Lura nodded, her voice small again. "And more will come." Back inside, Jake sat her down and cleaned the cut on her lip. She didn't flinch, but her eyes stayed distant, as if somewhere far away. "Why are they hunting you?" he finally asked. She didn't speak at first, then whispered, "Because I'm not supposed to exist." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Lura looked at the glowing lines on her skin, now brighter after the fight. "I was made, not born," she said. "Part of a project, one that was shut down, one they wanted to erase." Jake leaned back, stunned. "So you're a weapon?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I was meant to be more than that." She paused, looking him in the eye. "But they only saw what I could do, not who I am." Jake didn't say anything for a long time. Then he nodded. "Well, whoever you are, you saved my life tonight." Lura blinked, surprised. "And I'm not letting them take you," Jake added. "Not without a fight." She gave him a small smile, not shy this time, but grateful. Outside, the wind picked up, and the stars above seemed to shimmer a little brighter. The desert was still dangerous, but now neither of them felt completely alone. Something had changed, not just in the fight, but between them. They were no longer just a runaway and a mechanic. They were something more, a team. And whatever was coming next, they would face it together. The sand beneath the outpost trembled just once, so softly that Jake thought it was his imagination. But Lura felt it too, her eyes narrowing, her head tilting as if listening to something deeper than sound. She walked to the far wall, placed her hand against it, and closed her eyes. The glowing lines on her arm pulsed faintly, like something hidden inside her had awakened. Jake stood nearby, watching with quiet worry. He had seen her fight like a soldier, speak like a survivor, and now stand still like a sensor. Then Lura opened her eyes and spoke, her voice strange and distant. "There's something under us." Jake grabbed his tools, and together they followed her feeling into the back of the outpost. Behind stacked crates and dust-covered wires, there was a panel one Jake had never opened. Lura touched it, and the metal shimmered, shifting aside without resistance. Beneath it was a narrow tunnel, sloping down into the darkness. It wasn't part of his original build, and it hadn't been used in years. Maybe longer. Without a word, Lura stepped into it, her movements sure, like she already knew the way. Jake followed, flashlight in hand, trying to ignore the cold air brushing against his skin. The tunnel turned sharply, then widened into a chamber deep underground. The walls were covered in alien symbols, glowing faintly with the same blue light as the markings on Lura's skin. Jake stepped closer and touched one, feeling a slight hum beneath his fingertips. Lura didn't touch them. She simply walked forward until she reached a tall, round doorway. When she stood in front of it, The doorway reacted, opening with a low, mechanical breath. Inside, the room was wide and circular, with a platform in the center. On it stood a large structure part machine. Part sculpture, part memory. Lura stepped toward it like she was stepping into a dream. "This place," she whispered. "I've seen it before in dreams, in flashes." Jake looked around, confused and amazed. "What is this place?" Lura placed her hand on the machine, and the lights in the room flared to life. A projection rose above them, a galaxy map, swirling with light and data. Then it zoomed into a planet hers. Jake saw towers, cities, then battles, explosions. Fire raining from the sky. Then he saw her, older, scarred, wearing armor, leading others into war. She gasped, stepping back from the machine. The vision faded, leaving silence behind. Jake stared at her, unsure what to say. "That was you," he said slowly. "But in the future?" Lura looked down, her voice trembling. "I don't know. But I think this place shows what's possible. Or maybe what's coming." Jake circled the machine, noticing old control panels and unreadable warnings. "Why is this under my outpost?" he asked, mostly to himself. Lura answered without turning. "It's not yours, Jake. It was here before you, waiting." A low hum began again. Not from the machine, but from above. The scanner on Jake's wrist blinked red. "There's a ship," he said, "landing nearby." Lura's eyes sharpened, her body going stiff. "They found us again." Jake grabbed the tool bag and turned to her. "We need to shut this place down, hide it." But Lura didn't move. She stared at the machine, then said quietly, "Maybe I shouldn't hide anymore." Jake stepped closer, grabbing her shoulder. "They'll kill you, or worse." "I'm tired of running," she said, not angry. "Just tired." Then she pointed at the machine. "That vision, it showed a future I don't understand. But maybe it's why I was created, why I survived." The humming grew louder, dust falling from the ceiling as engines roared above. Jake pulled her away from the machine and back through the tunnel. They reached the surface just as the enemy ship landed, kicking up sand like a storm. This time, Jake wasn't unprepared. He had rebuilt his traps, set explosives, rerouted power from the outpost into shields and mines. But Lura stood in the open, not hiding, not running. Her eyes glowed faintly now, not just with light, but with decision. Jake looked at her. "What are you doing?" She didn't look back, only said, "Be ready." As the enemy door opened and shadows stepped out, Lura raised her hand toward the sky. The markings on her skin blazed bright, and the machine deep underground whispered back, "To life." The next morning, the outpost was quiet, too quiet, like the calm after a storm that no one saw coming. Jake walked through the ruins of his trap field, smoke still rising from the burned sand. Shards of broken armor and metal limbs lay scattered like the bones of a machine graveyard. The ship that had landed was now just wreckage, its crew either gone or dealt with. But Lura was gone too. No footprints, no blood, no sound. Only her necklace was left on the table, a small glowing stone that still held warmth. Next to it was a short message written in shaky human letters. "Thank you, Jake," it said. "I had to go." Jake stared at the message for a long time, not moving. His chest felt tight, like something had been ripped out suddenly and left nothing behind. He searched for hours, calling her name into the empty desert. No answer came, only the dry wind. She had vanished as suddenly as she arrived. The days passed slowly after that. One by one, dragging like old boots through sand, Jake fixed what he could. But it all felt meaningless now. He kept the necklace in his pocket, touching it sometimes just to make sure it was real. He told himself she was safe, that she had a reason, that she'd come back. But time kept moving, and she didn't. The weeks turned to months, and Jake stopped checking the scanners every night. Stopped hoping with every engine noise in the sky. But part of him never let go. He still caught himself setting out 2 plates at dinner. Still left the music player on, just in case she walked in humming again. People came and went from the Outer colonies, traders, explorers, scavengers. They asked about the strange outpost in the desert and the man who never left it. Jake told them little, only that he once met someone special, someone who changed everything. Almost 2 years later, it happened. A strange frequency broke through his old Cum Tower weak, dusty, but unmistakable. It was her voice. Older, stronger, but still hers. "Jake," the message said, "I'm coming back." Then silence. Jake froze where he stood, the wrench falling from his hand. He played the message again. And again, it was real. She was alive. He cleaned the outpost that night, like it was the first day he'd ever built it. Polished the broken corners, swept the floors, charged every light. He stood by the landing pad for hours, staring at the stars. But no ship came. Not that night, nor the next. Another week passed. Jake began to think maybe the message was old, maybe it was a trick. But just as he started to lose hope again, the sky lit up. A ship unlike any he had ever seen descended slowly. Quiet as a shadow, it hovered above the outpost, then gently landed without stirring even the sand. The door opened, steam rolling out like breath from a giant, and then she stepped down Laura, but not the same Laura, taller, stronger, wearing dark armor trimmed in gold, her markings glowing steady and bright. Her face was calm, her eyes sharp, like steel but soft when they saw him. She walked toward him, not fast, not slow, just sure. Jake didn't say anything, couldn't. Laura stopped in front of him, only inches away. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice deeper but still familiar. "I had to become what they feared I would be, so I could stop them." Jake looked into her eyes. "I waited," he said, voice rough. "I didn't know if you were alive." Laura reached into her belt pouch and pulled out something small. It was the necklace, repaired, still glowing. "I never forgot," she said, handing it back to him. He closed his fingers around it, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the time lost, not the danger, not the mystery. She had returned. And that was enough. But as he looked past her, he saw something else in the ship. Others waited, young ones, tired, injured, hopeful. Laura followed his eyes and nodded. "I didn't just come back for you," she said. "I came back for them." And Jake knew whatever came next, he wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that had only just begun. The moment she stepped back into the outpost, the walls seemed to remember her. Lights flickered to life even though Jake hadn't touched the controls. The machine beneath the desert began humming again, not loud but steady, like a heartbeat. Awakening from sleep, Laura placed one hand on the wall and closed her eyes, and the glowing lines on her skin lit up brighter than before. Jake stood a few steps behind her, staring not just at Laura, but at the presence she now carried. She didn't walk like a runaway anymore. She moved like a leader. She didn't look like someone hiding from her past. She looked like someone returning to claim it. There were others with her now, a small group of survivors. Mostly young, mostly scared. They had the same markings, the same faint light in their veins. They weren't soldiers yet, but they weren't normal children either. Jake helped them unload gear from the sleek ship while Laura walked to the center of the outpost and stood still. She was listening, again. Not to voices, but to something deeper beneath the sand. "It's waking up," she said. Without looking back, Jake raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "The old system, the one they buried long ago," she whispered. "They tried to erase it, but it remembers us." Later that evening, while the new arrivals rested, Laura and Jake went into the hidden chamber again. The machine was still there, pulsing slowly like it was breathing. This time, when Laura stepped onto the platform, the room responded with bright light and a low, echoing voice. Jake couldn't understand the words, but Laura nodded as if she could. She looked at him and said, "It's ready." He didn't need to ask what that meant. The enemy wasn't done, and neither were they. Laura connected her hand to the central console, and the machine scanned her completely. Then it scanned Jake, and for a second, he thought it might reject him, but instead, the machine spoke again, this time in broken human words. Human linked, it said. Chosen, Jake. Blinked. Chosen for what? Lura looked surprised too. I don't know, she admitted. I didn't think it would accept anyone outside our bloodline. They returned to the surface with more questions than answers. The stars above shimmered like they were watching. Then, without warning, a distant explosion cracked across the sky. Jake and Lura rushed out and saw smoke on the horizon too close for comfort. They found us again, Jake muttered. Lura stared at the smoke for a moment, then said, No, not just them. Another ship came down different, heavier, slower. And covered in strange armor, it didn't land softly. It slammed into the desert like it belonged there, from inside. Tall figures emerged, strangers with the same glowing marks as Lura's, but their faces were hard cold. And their armor looked like it had seen too many battles. One stepped forward, a woman with scars across her face and eyes like frozen stone. She looked at Lura and spoke in their native tongue, her voice sharp and commanding. Lura didn't respond. With fear, but with silence, then she stepped forward alone. Meeting the woman in the middle of the sand, Jake wanted to follow. But something told him this was her moment. The wind around them stilled, as if the planet itself was listening. The conversation lasted minutes. Words exchanged quietly and quickly. Then the older woman nodded, stepped aside, and the others followed. They weren't enemies. Not yet, but they weren't allies either. Back in the outpost, Jake sat across from Lura and asked, Who were they? She looked tired but calm. Old ones, she said. The ones who stayed behind when the rest of us were hunted. Jake leaned forward. Can we trust them? Lura looked at the children resting nearby, then said, I don't know, but they'll join us for now. That night, they didn't sleep. Instead, Lura sat beside Jake under the stars, watching the sky like it was a map she needed to read. I thought I'd feel stronger when I came back, she said softly. Jake looked at her. You are stronger. She shook her head gently. I'm not finished yet. He didn't press her. He just sat beside her, the silence between them saying everything that didn't need words. Above them, a strange new star flickered into view, brighter than the rest. Neither of them noticed it, but the machine underground did, and it began to change. The morning came without light. The sky was covered in thick gray clouds, and even the sun felt far away. Inside the outpost, the air was heavy with quiet tension, the kind that presses on the chest before something big happens. The machine underground had not gone silent. It had grown louder, deeper, as if its voice was no longer a whisper, but a warning. Jake stood by the window, watching the new star in the sky. It wasn't a star anymore, not really. It had gotten bigger, brighter, and now it moved. It wasn't a planet or a moon, it was a ship, and it was heading straight toward them. Lura stepped beside him, her armor already on, her expression unreadable. That's them, she said quietly. The ones who made me. The ones who wanted to erase us. Jake nodded, though. His heart was beating too fast to speak. Are you ready? He finally asked. No, Lura answered truthfully. But I will be. The young one stood in a line outside, dressed in gear made from old parts and courage. They didn't have real weapons, not many, but they had something else, hope. And Lura, the old warriors from the second ship, watched in silence, waiting to see what Lura would do. She didn't speak to them like a commander. She simply looked them in the eyes and said, Follow me if you want to survive. Then she turned and walked toward the signal tower, where the machine below had fully awakened. Its panels opened, wires shifting, lights spinning like a storm. Trapped in metal, Jake stood next to her, ready, not with weapons, but with the connection the machine had chosen. Lura placed her hand on the final switch, and the ground began to shake. From beneath the desert, something massive rose. Not a weapon, not a building. A ship, older than history, designed to be. Flown by one of her kind, and now a human too. The entrance opened, steam pouring out, and Lura stepped inside without fear. Jake followed, his hand still holding the necklace she had once left behind. Inside, The ship responded to them instantly. The controls lit up in both alien and human language, merging like they had waited for this moment. Lura took the helm, Jake beside her at the second panel. He didn't know how to fly an alien ship, but the machine showed him, guided him, trusted him. Above them, the sky opened wide as the enemy ship arrived, casting a giant shadow over the desert. It spoke in a voice that boomed across every radio. Cold and full of finality. "Surrender the prototypes, and you will be spared." Jake looked at Lura. "You don't believe that, right?" She shook her head once, her voice low and steady. "They never keep promises." Then she activated the ship, and the sand exploded into the air as it lifted. The ancient engines screamed to life, and the ground fell away. They rose into the sky, heading straight for the enemy vessel. The first blasts came fast, but the old ship moved like it was alive. Jake managed the shields, feeling every hit as if it struck his own chest. Lura fired the first counterattack, a beam of blue light slicing across the enemy's wing. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and still. They pressed forward. The young ones watched from the ground, eyes full of fear and awe. One whispered, "She said we'd be safe." The older warrior beside him replied, "She never said it would be easy." In the final stretch, just before impact, the enemy ship launched a core bomb, something too large to dodge. Jake shouted, "We won't make it." But Lura reached over, took his hand, and said calmly, "Trust me." She pushed her palm into the console, and the ship lit up from within. A bright wave of energy burst outward, not just a shield, but a pulse that rewrote the skies. The enemy ship froze, its systems overloaded, and then it simply stopped. Every light on it died, every weapon fell silent. The desert below cheered, the young ones jumping, the warriors raising their hands to the sky. Jake and Lura landed softly, smoke rising behind them. But peace settling in, they stepped out of the ship side by side, and for the first time since she arrived all those years ago, Lura looked calm. Jake looked at her and asked, "What now?" She looked around at the new family she had built, the strange planet she had once feared, and said, "Now we live." She smiled at him, not as a soldier, not as a child, but as someone who had finally found home, and Jake smiled back because he knew she was no longer running. She had returned not just stronger, but whole, and he would stay by her side, as he always had.